and welcome to Project Amplify, the podcast where we believe that even the smallest conversations can have the biggest impact. Here's a fun fact to get us started. If you laid all the Lego bricks sold every year end to end, it would circle the Earth 5 times. Today's guest was my favorite Lego building buddy growing up, my older brother, Sean Mobley. I was really excited to talk with Sean for the podcast. Sean works for the Museum of Flight in Seattle, Washington. He's actually the husband of the guest of our first episode, Myro Small. If you haven't had a chance to listen to Myro's episode, check it out. As a self-proclaimed history nerd, okay, maybe I proclaimed him to be one, I shouldn't have been surprised when Sean told me one of the people he admires most is the second president of the country, John Adams. So we start by talking about John Adams, but the conversation quickly goes into the art of having hard conversations. Here we go. Hey, Sean, thanks for joining us this evening.
Happy to be here.
What's the weather like out in Seattle? You've had a hot summer.
It is now a balmy 60 degrees, which is great. I always say that if I wanted heat, I would have moved to Arizona.
I remember growing up, we would call you the anti-coatite, some Seinfeld reference
right.
that is going to be lost on a lot of people, but you would refuse to wear a winter coat even when it was freezing.
Yeah, well, when we lived in Wisconsin, if you remember, I would rarely wear a jacket even in the winter there.
Yeah, no, I remember.
I
never understood it.
Well, it's like, why wear a heavy jacket if I'm only going to be outside for a few minutes, like going into the school or going between a building? And I'm just weird like that, I guess.
I know you wanted to talk about somebody who inspires you. So I'm curious, who do you want to talk about?
So a person that I think of whenever this question kind of comes up, or like, well, who would you like to meet sort of thing in history, I always think about John Adams. John Adams was the second president of the United States. And I think he's a pretty inspirational person. And each passing year, it feels like he becomes more relevant. Some of the things I really like about him come down to his desire to see the best for the country, regardless of like political party, if that makes sense. Now that is oversimplifying his point of view, but I'll just give an example. So
can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Is John Adams a character in Hamilton?
He was, and when I said John Adams, I almost said it like King George. John Adams. I'm somebody who truly tries to think, who tries to see reason in every person and like value in every person. And that I feel like is an art that we're losing a lot, in the ability to talk to somebody with whom you disagree. Now, there are opinions that are really not worth agreeing with. I'm not trying to say that, you should agree with horribly extreme people or like try to find common ground. But I will say that there is something about the humanity in everybody. And John Adams, I think, really believed this. And as an example, this might be getting too in the weeds, but when he was president, even though he represented a political party that doesn't exist anymore, called the Federalists, he made a concerted effort to really try and work with the other party, which has a name that sounds similar to a modern party, but it's not the same. They were called the Democratic Republicans, or the Jeffersonian Republicans, named after Thomas Jefferson. Neither of these parties exist anymore, but he really made a concerted effort to work with them. And it was tough to work.
And he didn't agree with them, right?
Yes, he didn't necessarily agree with them. They had different agendas. And so I just, again, admire him for really, really trying to be a leader for all people, as opposed to being a leader for some people. And he did not succeed. And I want to be clear, he was not a perfect president. But but he really really tried.
I was going to ask you how, when you say truly understanding somebody's other side, the other side of somebody who you don't agree with, how does that, as somebody who's married to a man, we
Mm-hmm.
know there are lots of people in this country who don't think that you should be allowed to live your life. I think it would be really hard to have a conversation with somebody who disagrees with the fundamentals of who you are. Well, how would you have a conversation with somebody who is so adamant in their belief that your life is wrong?
Mm-hmm.
How do you have that conversation with someone?
Yeah, and it comes down to easier said than done. And that's what I think I said earlier, something about, there are opinions that aren't really worth, trying to reconcile. And it's not, again, a matter of writing those people off, although maybe you need to for your own health and safety. I have friends who have really cut people out of their lives because it's harmful.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fortunate that I haven't really had that in my life. But I will be honest, I have encountered that as somebody who does what's called public history, which is basically history that doesn't end up in a textbook.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not out there getting a PhD and writing articles for publication in academic journals, but I am doing the work of history and getting it out in front of people. Through museums and through my own podcast and other presentations and public speaking and things like that.
And you do a really good job of telling the stories that haven't been told for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, and well, thank you. It is a privilege to get to do that. To be honest, it really does feel like a privilege. But to answer your question, I've experienced it firsthand. I've had people say just ugly, ugly, ugly things to me or about me because I'm choosing to do this work. And it becomes a question of what is worth your time and attention. It is not worth my time and attention to try to engage random people online who say some pretty ugly things in the venues where I've done these presentations. But at the end of the day, if I could, and if I had the time and the inclination, I truly would want to invite those people to have coffee or tea or water or anything else and just sit and chat. Because I think, and I think it's been proven time and time again, one of the most important ways to help people see that humanity is present them with an actual person. An actual human, and
put a face to the conversation.
Exactly. It's a lot harder to disagree or not disagree, but it's a lot harder to have those hard emotions when there are people, actual faces that you can look at, actual humans to talk to.
I was just listening to a podcast, and it was with a psychologist, and they were saying how your brain has space for about 150 people. And so you want those, that range of people to be as diverse as possible because of exactly what you're saying. If you hear something on the news about anti-LGBTQ plus, but then you think, oh, for me, I think, oh, that's my brother. And that gives you more empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Or if it's something with immigration, I think, oh, that's our grandparents. It just makes it more personal, and it might make people feel more of a sense of like, here, what can I do to help? So the more diverse that 150 people are in your brain, the more action you might want to take to help, do your part to rectify some of the wrongs of the world.
Yeah.
But that diversity of 150 people isn't always going to come if you surround yourself with the same ideas all the time and the same people all the time. You have to put work into it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And some of that hardest work is with the people you disagree with.
Hmm.
Why would I choose to spend time with somebody who disagrees with me when I can just as easily block them on Facebook? And I'm not talking about just like fundamental identity stuff. I'm talking
Right.
about, disagreements. But in those conversations, some of my best friends are people with whom I disagree. I'll be completely honest. But I relish the fact that we can sit and have a conversation, and maybe I am that person for them that they think about. Um, and there's somebody that I can empathize with, at least when I'm making my own decisions, if I'm voting on an issue or something, even if I'm not going to vote a way they want. Um, it just I feel like I've had a better conversation and make a more informed decision as a result. Um,
I like how you're saying conversation because something that I've been having discussions with people, even in our family, is like,
Conversations.
yeah, I'm choosing that word, and I use the word conversation very purposefully in the description of this podcast. But in the context of people who you might not necessarily agree with, I question why it seems like in our country, if you're having a discussion with somebody you don't agree with, a lot of time people call it a debate or an argument, or there's an implication that there has to be a winner and a loser, or that somebody has to change their mind right away. But I like the word conversation because then that implies that you're listening, like truly listening to what they're saying. It doesn't mean you need to change your mind in that moment. It doesn't mean there needs to be somebody who's right and who's wrong in that moment. But the more conversations we have, then maybe down the line, you'll bring somebody onto the right side of history. But if you're going into it making somebody feel attacked or somebody feeling like their thoughts aren't being heard, no change is going to happen, no matter which side you're on.
Yeah, I think that's very apt. And that's why I said earlier, kind of the weird phrase of like, it's taught me Adam's story makes me more comfortable with discomfort. And that's kind of, you put it much more elegantly than me. And that's kind of what I was getting at of like being okay with just letting a conversation end in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
You make a really good point, right? If you're going in with the agenda of winning, then you've either won or lost, and
Mm-hmm.
you're probably going to lose.
What's that going to gain?
Yeah, and it gains nothing.
I want to bring the point home again. I mean, we're sitting in a place of privilege as, two white people.
Mhm.
Um, but knowing when to walk away from something that's toxic to your health and mental health, that's in this context of having disagreements with people, like that's very appropriate. And that's up to the individual to decide when to walk away. But you have had to do that with your previous job before the museum. Now, the national organization that I won't name because unless you want me to, one of the reasons you did leave was because you couldn't be who you were. And I always thought that was really brave because I know what you were with that group since you were a kid. And I know it's still a part of your identity, but walking away from that must have been really, really hard. Um, because it wasn't that you didn't love what you were doing. It was because people, people weren't there to have many people weren't going to accept you for who you were. And that doesn't do anybody any favors for your health and mental health. Um, yeah, I don't know if I've ever actually said that to you, so I thought I should.
Well, thank you. I appreciate knowing that I'm a trendsetter. I'm brave.
Well, I think we established from the beginning that you are a trendsetter, but I also I kind of hate that I'm calling you brave because you shouldn't have to be brave in that situation. If things actually work the way they should work, you shouldn't have to walk away from a job because of bigotry and because of prejudice. So calling you brave doesn't even, that's not really the right word, but I don't know what other word there is for that.
And I want to emphasize what you just emphasized too is like this is not something people have to do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as you said, you shouldn't have to justify yourself in any way. So you don't have to be the person who does this. I'm
Nope.
certainly not a person who does it all the time, although because I've, kind of publicly stated through my work that I am a resource, it comes with the territory. So I've kind of put it out there that I am a person who can be a resource and who wants to do this, but not everybody has to do it. Not everyone has to do it all the time.
No, and I think it goes back to what we were saying about how there are so many more resources out there that people who have the space mentally, physically, emotionally, and the privilege, we should be the ones who are stepping up to have the hard conversations. And we shouldn't be relying on the people who are being marginalized, being oppressed, it's our job to amplify. It's our job to do our own research. It's our job to be the allies who are standing with, so that not everything is being done on the backs of the people who are already so tired of just trying to exist. So those hard conversations, I know that I'm trying to step up to be a leader in that sense. But it's nice to know that John Adams was already doing it, 200 years ago, setting that example.
Yeah. Well, and he wasn't popular for doing it. He was only a one-term president, which means he only served 4 years and then lost his second election. So maybe that's a bad sign.
No.
Of course, it's a very complicated story. He didn't just lose because he was a mediator. He had, as with any election, it's political. So it's more complicated than just that. Plus, he was following George Washington,
who was immensely popular.
Yeah. Imagine having the most popular person in the history of the country, and then you're not going to do well. And
nobody wants to go on after Beyonce.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like following Beyonce. Yeah, and he screwed up too. I mean, he made some poor choices as president and paid the price. Kind of ironically, because he and his wife worked very closely together, both personally and politically. And there's kind of a joke that when she was sick for a couple months is when he made some of his worst decisions. So,
well, that's no surprise. So what advice would you have for somebody who is looking to who knows that a hard conversation needs to start, but isn't really sure what the first step should be? And is willing, ready to have the conversation, the mental place to do it, but just doesn't know the first step. What would you tell them?
I think my number one piece of advice is to have a community, have people who are in your court. Even if you think you are alone, it is so easy on the internet these days to find a community, whatever that means to you. Mm-hmm. And online communities are just as valid as any in-person community. I have some friends who I've known for years that I've only met in person once or twice, and I do consider them some of my closest friends. And then I have friends who I've known in person for years who are also very close friends. But there's a recurring theme in LGBT history, and I think in other histories too. I just happen to know more about this, of isolation being used as a tool to make people afraid, right? Mm-hmm. If you think you are the only person like you, then you're afraid, and it's easier for you to be controlled. It's the classic Yoda quote, right? Fear leads to anger leads to hate leads to suffering. I'm not going to try to do a Yoda.
I think you need to work on your Yoda voice. Your Hagrid voice is better. Can you say it like Hagrid?
Oh, geez. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. I turn it. Hate leads to suffering. Suffering. Yeah, that kind of evolved there. But it is when people have that community, then there is strength in that. I mean, that's why pride parades happen. It is, as much as they've evolved over the years, it's a way for people to know that they are not alone. And I think that just makes it easier to have conversations, both because you're not alone, and because you have people who, as soon as you finish that conversation, you go start texting them, FaceTime them, Zoom them. Let them know how it went. They can be a support group. You can bounce ideas off them beforehand. So that would be just the number one thing to do.
Find your community.
Find your community. Yep. Before anything else.
I love it. Do you have anything else that you want to talk about before I ask you my last question?
We've been going for a while here, and I don't know, it's getting kind of long. I don't mind. I love talking, as is going to be recorded.
Well, we can always, yes, we all know you love to talk. We can always do another one of these in a couple of months. But the last question I have started asking, and I realized I did not tell you this before, so I am sorry for putting you on the spot.
It's okay.
What do you amplify?
I like to amplify. This sounds so strange, but truth. When it comes to history, there's a lot of mythology, and there's a lot of misunderstanding, and there's a lot of, I'll just call it misinterpretation of what has happened in the past. Stories that have been just misrepresented because people over the last 225 years had an agenda and they wanted us to learn specific things.
The same 150 people are telling the same stories over and over. There isn't the diversity in the storytelling that there should be. Wow.
Exactly.
Everything connects.
Exactly. It's important for us to truly understand the past, and not in a way that is superficial, which is what I feel like we get. This very superficial understanding, meaning like very surface level, very
one-sided.
Yeah,
one-sided,
not
very deep,
and mythologized. You talked about Hamilton. Mythology meaning like not made up, but kind of told and retold so many times that a version of the story is what we know. Kind of cutting through all that really helps see what what actually happens, and really helps see how diverse this country has been from the beginning. And diversity meaning more than just skin color or gender. There's so much diversity in so many different ways. And when we get out of looking at the world the way we're taught, then I feel like I'm being a conspiracy theorist now. Look beyond the lines, man.
I think what you're getting at is that we are taught things in school by our families, by society,
teachers.
Yeah, I know that we're part of the problem, but I also know that we can be a part of the solution if we make a very pointed, concentrated effort to diversify the story, to shine a light on, there's a saying that there are two sides to every story, and that's too simple. There are more than two sides because there's more than one truth. And just saying that, learning something on the surface, you're not getting to the truth of it. Digging deeper is where you find the truth.
Right. I can give one more anecdote as evidence here if you want.
Sure.
One of the things that comes to my mind is with drag. Some of your listeners might know like RuPaul's Drag Race. During World War II, if you go look at pictures of World War II, just go look at pictures of World War II.
Let's do a little bit more of a specific search, please, Sean.
Yeah, there were a lot of drag shows in World War II. It was considered so important to the war effort for drag performance to happen as like entertainment to keep the soldiers from being bored because there was no TV. For years, it's just kind of been taught that the drag shows happened. These men dressed up as women, and they did it for God and country. They just kind of happened. Well, okay, sure. Like, no, not at all. These were largely queer people who were doing this, and not only were they doing it, like they were being asked to do it and being celebrated for it. And remember, this was in a time when homosexual people were not allowed to serve in the military. So like in order to keep that kind of narrative going, the story that homosexual people never served in the military couldn't be in the military. Everyone kind of had to pretend that when they were doing drag in World War II, it was just dudes doing drag, dudes
Mm-hmm.
dressing up as ladies.
But the truth,
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. When you dig anything, and kind of the point is that people were saying this the whole time.
right?
Like people were saying the truth the whole time, if you knew where to look. And it's only more recently that those stories have been centered, and that's what I mean by amplifying the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Just trying to get those stories centered.
Very cool. Well, Sean, thanks so much for sharing your truth and your passion for history. I know I made fun of it as a child, but I do appreciate it now. I appreciate you
I
taking
make
the
fun
time
of
to
it
be
now.
here.
I've turned into dad. So
uh, Gotta love it. Okay. Well, thanks for joining us.
thank you, Lauren.
I hope you enjoyed listening to that conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. You might find it hard to believe, but Sean and I fought a lot growing up. Now I see how fortunate I am to have such a cool big brother. I always learn so much when I talk to him. It was actually really hard to edit this episode because he really did have so much interesting stuff to say. I have a lot of points to ponder from this episode, but I think the one that stuck with me the most is how important it can be to go into conversations without thinking that someone has to win or lose. Even if you don't agree with what someone is saying, having the ability to listen to their perspective is important. That being said, here's our challenge for the week. The next couple of times you find yourself in a disagreement with someone, pause and truly listen to their opinions. I'm not saying you have to change your mind, though maybe you will. I know Sean and I said this many times in the episode, but I want to say it again. Even though listening to other people is important, there are some opinions that aren't worth listening to because they are grounded in hate. It's not always worth the time and energy. Protect yourself and your mental health first. But when you find yourself able to, try to open yourself up to what another person has to say. Stay curious, be kind, and I'll say bye for now.